Hi, this is Dr. Teena Cahill, and welcome to Wisdom and Beyond. We have a very special guest here, my friend Dr. Jan Keys. Hello, Jan.
Hi, Tina.
It's great to see you.
Good to see you, too.
And you have a doctorate in clinical psychology with a specialization in organizational psychology, right?
That is correct.
And the name of your company is?
Strategic Human Resources, Inc.
What does that mean?
Well, you know, it's an interesting thing. I mean, when we first started the business roughly about 20 years ago, I had the idea that organizations really don't have a very good sense about what's the most important thing that makes them run. And so I said, well, what is that? And I said, it's people.
Right.
And so that's really how the notion about strategic human resources came about, was simply just the notion that you've got to have people in order to make organizations work. So there you have it.
Well, you know that I speak on leadership a lot. That's one of the ways you and I connected. We met at a dinner and then started talking, and we sort of haven't stopped, right?
That's correct.
We look at the world in a very similar way, but maybe come to it from different ways. And you know, when I talk about leadership needing to be authentic. I'm one kind of leader, you're another kind of leader, and how we build our leadership on a platform of self-care. And what you know is, in addition to working in the corporate America, I've applied my leadership model to caregiving. I am a caregiver. I've applied it to aging. I am the oldest of the boomers. And so I see leadership, particularly as it applies to women, that it's important to use the term that you use. You didn't have to use the term leadership. To use that term, because if it helps people see themselves in a different way, don't you think?
I agree.
To see yourself as a leader?
I agree. I have to actually say that in growing up, one of the things that I really never thought about was that people perceived me to be a leader. And I think that's kind of a very difficult thing, particularly for women, to basically take ownership of and to really embrace it. And
so you had an awareness of that?
I had an awareness of it. I mean, I noticed that a lot of people were coming to me and asking me questions and getting advice, and I'm like, you know, of course I was happy to do it, but I never thought of it as being really about leadership.
Well, I have to tell you a funny story. You know part of this story. That when I was a little kid back in Ohio in the 50s, I used to get in trouble all the time. And what they used to say on my report card is that I talked too much, right? Well, besides the fact that a wonderful woman came into my life and started entering me in public speaking contests and essay contests so all my ideas could come out on paper and I could speak, and she really shaped my life. A few years after I got those marks that said I talked too much, they had another thing they could check on the report card, and it morphed into shows leadership skills. And I always think about that when I think about young girls and women and Carol Gilligan's work, that if we shut those girls up, they never get to take that path from their great creativity to their leadership. They're thwarted in that.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because that's one thing that we hadn't talked about. But I also was known as a troublemaker.
I love it. I love it. All my favorite people got in trouble.
And
great strength. You know,
it's
in
a great
today's world,
strength.
I'd probably have a diagnosis, right? But you've always got to remember there are great strengths in those diagnoses. Don't tell me Thomas Edison didn't have a diagnosis, okay?
Absolutely. And I remember being told by, I grew up in a fairly small community within a large city. And I remember being told by teachers, you know, listen, you should be more like your sisters.
Oh, yes.
And what happened to you? Yes.
Who were good.
Who were good.
But that's the problem. Women are too good. I love Erica Jong's statement. Show me a woman who doesn't feel guilty and I'll show you a man. Right? Women think they have to be so good. Right. And somehow I escaped that. And you escaped that too?
I escaped it.
How do you think you escaped that?
I can very much relate to, probably the turning point was my sisters were very much into Barbie. And I was very much into Barbie until they basically excluded me.
Oh.
And then I was left in a family of 5 other siblings to find a place. Well, guess what my place became? Playing with my brothers.
Oh, that's interesting. So you picked up the sort of skill sets or the attitudes of your brothers.
Absolutely.
Interesting. Did that include a lot of physical exercise?
It did.
That's what, you know, all that research about girls and sports and Title IX and how it helps you really go forward. I mean, I don't think there's anything better than a girl in sports in terms of developing leadership. And I can think, hanging out with guys, you picked up the same sort of cultural norms.
I did, and I also learned very quickly, because imagine having brothers, and they were roughly like 7, 8, 9 when you didn't want any girls around. basically kind of shooing me off, saying, go away. But I was determined that I was going to play baseball.
So did I. Interesting.
With
So did
them.
I. I played baseball with the neighborhood boys. Isn't that? They didn't always want me there, but I stayed.
Exactly. The same with me. And I was determined I was going to play football with them.
Oh, is that right? That's
And
great.
my career ended very abruptly when I got a very bad sprained index finger.
Oh. My daughter likes to play what they used to call powder puff football, but she liked to play football. So what do you think? So part of it is with your brothers, and that sort of shaped the kind of leader that you are. What kind of leader are you? Knowing that I believe that when you go into these companies, you look to bring out the strengths in individual people, I'm sure. But tell me about you as a leader. How do you see yourself as a leader?
I think for me that life experiences have been very wonderful in creating a real appreciation for that you're a leader when you are able to support other people
Yes.
into developing their best.
Absolutely how I see leadership. It's about listening and developing the people around you.
It's about
not
listening.
about you.
It's not about you.
It's about a skill set that you have to help people reach their potential.
Absolutely.
I agree with that.
And that when you are able to do that, now you hear the analogy of being a conductor, that when you are able to be, have the capacity to bring their talents, regardless of what they are, to some type of agreeable dialogue and process, that's really where your skills increase and improve as a leader, but it's also where that you optimize their growth and development, and it's where that you begin to get recognition for being a leader.
And I think the trick is, see, this is where I think, I never used to care about leadership. In fact, mostly I didn't think about it. And actually, because you and I both come out of academia, there was a part of my life where I think I was a little elitist. And I thought if you dealt with sort of commerce that you were somehow not as smart. Well, it's just not true. Not that I'm so smart, but I mean, that was my own little problem that I had to deal with, right? And so then when I started getting interested in leadership and these kinds of things, I've just found it to be an incredibly fascinating thing. And so what I think happens now, especially as it relates to women and as it relates to caregivers and people that are aging and all that kind of stuff, because I think it's important to see ourselves as leaders, as caregivers, to be empowered, and as we age, to be empowered. But when I look at it, and I look at the research into positive psychology, which is really the research into what is right with us, right? And I know that in positive psychology, we look at all kinds of ways to be okay, all kinds of different strengths that we have. Just like Howard Gardner looks at multiple intelligence, we look at multiple strengths that people have. And so I think the trick is to help people in a very positive way find those strengths, but then what you said is match them up with the task that is within their skill set so that they can succeed. And when you look then, and so if you take that in the workplace and you match the people's strengths with the skill sets, with the tasks, and they succeed, then you've got what Martin Seligman talks about in terms of what authentic happiness is, finding your strengths, having a passion, making a contribution, and it just sort of all fits together. Do you look at it like that?
I do. And I can tell you that in the work that we do, it's probably the most really thrilling experience is when you are asked to do a project. You get lots of people who get engaged, and they're at very different places in terms of their own sense of self and their own value of self. But what we readily are able to identify is what is it that they bring? What can they offer to the process? And that everybody brings something. Some folks bring content knowledge.
Right.
Some people bring what I call the police position of saying, stop that, don't do that, ouch, that hurts. And some people bring an incredible sense of process.
Yes.
And so I think what we learn is by bringing all of the wealth of talents, not only do people rise in terms of their own personal strengths, but oftentimes people will learn to adopt some of the strengths that they experience in the group.
That you learn, just as you learned from your brothers.
Absolutely.
Just as I've learned from the people in my
Right.
community. And And we all learn from the people around us.
And that's actually a incredible experience. I think probably the one reason for doing the kind of work that I do is that it allows me as an individual to continue my learning. There isn't a chance that I'm not going to learn something.
Oh, absolutely.
And so it
when I'm out there on the road and I'm speaking, first of all, I'm having more fun than anybody. And secondly, I'm learning way more than anyone. I mean, that is what we do just as curious people. And as leaders, we listen, I think, to the rhythm of the universe or to the nuances. The Dan Goleman's idea of emotional intelligence, we just sort of pick up what goes on and you synthesize that in some way. I think that's part of the listening and development that goes on in leadership.
Absolutely.
So what do you do? Well, let me tell you something that I worry about. Do you believe that when you go into corporations, that men and women have different views of leadership or see themselves differently as leaders, or do you see any gender differences these days?
I'm oftentimes asked this question, and I do believe that there are differences between men and women, but I caution people about that because there are women who have more traditional masculine characteristics and men who have more traditional feminine characteristics. And so I'm very cautious to say that, yes, there are some attributes and traits and qualities that might be more characteristic of women, but I also think that when you start looking at what gets rewarded in organizations, then you're going to deselect some of those qualities, and so you're selecting, in many situations, more women who have more masculine traits in terms of leadership qualities.
You and I both know that the brains of men and women are, what, 99.999% the same. And so I don't really like this Mars-Venus kind of thing. And one of the things I say is, I don't want to have to go to a different planet to visit my husband or the men in my life. I mean, it's hard enough here on Earth, don't you think? You know? But the truth is that if men and women see themselves as very different, they're less likely, the research suggests, to try to work things out. We are less likely to try to work things out with people we think we have nothing in common with, which is why we have diplomacy. That's why we have the State Department, to help us find the commonalities so that we can work things out. And I think you can bring that thinking into the workplace, into the individual places. But here's what I think about a lot. And it's not so much about masculine and feminine qualities as it is ascribed cultural expectations. I know, and you know, being a mother, that being a mother is a high-level leadership position. And I think that everyone needs to see themselves as the CEO of their own life. And I think that sounds kind of funny to say it that way, like it's an overstatement, but it helps you kind of think about it. Nobody can live your life but you. If you want change to happen, you got to make change, right? And so I think that women do all these incredible things, both at work and in the home and in the community and in the state and in the country and with their mothers and as caregivers and as whatever it is, professionals and as grandparents and parents. But once they take their jackets off and they've left work, they don't see it as leadership.
I totally agree with you. And I think that for many women who struggle with whether working in the home full-time, I have friends who oftentimes say, you know, gee, I don't know if I could lead. And I go like, what? I mean, you know, they're incredible. I mean, they
I say, don't tell me you're not a leader. What does a life not led look like anyway?
Exactly.
You know? But yes.
So really appreciating their strength and being, I think, quite frankly, afraid to embrace it.
Or not understanding what it is. I think, because like I think when guys go coach soccer and when they go coach Little League and when they go contribute in the community, they see themselves as leaders by and large when they're doing that. But I just don't think women use that language.
I agree.
So I think it is a matter of knowing your strengths, but I also think it's a matter of you changing the language. So when I say I think caregivers are the greatest leaders on earth because we listen for people who may not be able to listen for themselves.
True.
I'm trying to reframe how caregivers look at themselves. But I think mothers and women in particular need to reframe that, just because I think that when I give talks, I tell people, do not refer to yourself as a woman leader because you've just marginalized yourself. You've just said the men are the leaders and you're something different. Leadership is leadership.
I agree.
And strengths are strengths, and using your and so I've got this big thing of trying to get women to see that it's a bottom up, not top down, because I think a lot of times trainers come in and it feels top down, not bottom up.
And I'm going to pick up on the point that you made about that, because I think that's really what I mean about the fear of embracing leadership. I think for so many women, the notion of leadership is masculine.
I agree. I think they think that too.
And leadership is not,
It's
gender neutral. People lead in all kind of ways, and I think there's such an underestimate. I always say to folks, you know, one reason why I work out of the home is because I know that the hardest job is working in the home.
Right. Well, for you.
Absolutely.
My skills are not particularly attuned to in the home,
Right.
but I know people whose skills are, and that is great for them to,
Right.
to do that. I mean,
And so for me, I recognize that working in the home really requires a tremendous amount of leadership.
yeah, working with the family. I mean,
Yes.
those skills. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Those are different, I think, than working in the home. I was thinking of cooking and cleaning.
No.
No one wants to come to dinner when I say, I've made it, you know? Oh, really? Well, she's pretty good at salads. She doesn't go too far past that.
But managing a family,
but
raising your kids.
right, it's a leadership position.
It's a leadership
and
position.
whereas men, if we go to those cultural stereotypes, could see themselves as a leader at work and then use some of those skills, sort of their management leadership skills at work, and it was more of a continuum. And that's why I've got this sort of campaign to get women to change their language, look at themselves differently, and men too if they don't look at it that way. So what else do you think made you who you are? How did you decide to become a psychologist?
Well, I actually decided very early in life. By the time I was in the 8th grade,
Wow.
I
don't think I even knew what a psychologist was.
I was a very lucky person, went to a very interesting pilot school, which is one of the first magnet high schools in the country.
That's great.
And I was exposed to psychology, and I think probably what made it such a natural choice for me is that I unfortunately was a child who had lost a parent.
Yes.
By the age of 8.
Yes.
And had some very harsh life realities. What that did for me is I think you either rise to the occasion if you've gotten enough good stuff in there to sustain you, and in my case I had. You rise to the occasion. Kids saw me as being sort of somewhere between a kid and probably a little adult.
Adult, yeah. A responsible girl.
A responsible girl. And so, you know, it was a natural thing that when there were problems, then guess who we'd go and talk to?
Right.
And so I kind of learned that that's what people
So
do.
you knew, see, when I was in the 8th grade, I was still reading like the nun story. And I wanted to be a nun. I wasn't Catholic, but it was just such a dramatic story that, you know, I was still reading that and anything else I could read. What was the one? I forget the other one, but one of them that I loved. So I was still like trying out different lives. And so it never occurred to me till much later. You know how I decided to be a psychologist?
How?
I had a master's in counseling. I had become a single parent. I had 3 kids. And I knew I wanted to get more education. And I couldn't figure out whether to go get a doctorate in psych, which interests me, or to get a law degree. So I went to the bookstore and I read law books and I read psych books and said, ooh, I like this better than that. That's what I'm going to do. But by that time I was probably 29 or 30 years old. So you came to it much quicker than I did. But I'm glad that you did that. Well, one of the things you and I have done is we've talked about how could a little white girl who grew up across the street from a pig farm in Ohio and a little African-American girl who grew up in a wonderful cultural environment in Dallas meet each other and say, oh my God, we're sisters.
Exactly.
Isn't it interesting?
Yeah.
And so where you grew up, I remember you telling me racism wasn't a big thing right in your pocket. And tell me about the community where you grew up.
I grew up in a very protected, it was one of the very first African-American middle-class communities in Dallas. And so many professionals moved there, and everybody knew everybody. Education was wonderful. The school was self-contained, went from 1st to 12th grade, and so it was very protected.
Very protected.
Very protected.
Very good.
And very wonderful in many, many ways. We were protected from sort of the outside pressures of what, you know, some kids experienced. But my parents were folks who were very clear about what children needed, But they were also clear about the fact that a child needs to have exposure to the world outside of a very small pocket.
Right.
And so because of that, you know, in this community, my parents did a lot of volunteer work. They were visionaries. And so talking about visions and dreams, you know, a lot of people talk about a lot of things at the dinner table. Well, in my houses, we talked about visions and dreams.
Isn't it great?
You know,
wonderful.
Fun activities always included visions and dreams. I mean, my siblings and I, we all laugh about it because we can all kind of finish the statements that were guiding principles that our parents had.
Who pushed that, mom or dad?
I think mother was probably the most important person in that. I mean, I could write a whole book on the things that mother...
She had big ideas.
She had big ideas.
Isn't that great?
And very similar to you, Teena, my mother had 6 children. We're all roughly a year apart.
Wow.
And she had 1 year of college at the time that she stopped her education and went back.
That's great.
And became a Fulbright scholar.
Oh my God, isn't that great?
Yeah.
That's great.
And had 2 masters.
Yeah.
And
so she was a great model for you.
She was a
and
great
for
model
the kids,
for me.
and you had a model right there in the home.
I had a model
That's
that
great.
I could very quickly identify with. And mother was, I think, you know, a lot of people say, well, isn't that horrible? Wasn't it a miserable experience?
Why would that be? You mean
well,
that she went to school? Oh, for
I think people
sakes.
thought that she, you know, that maybe she wasn't very available to us, or that, you know, things were very rigid. But what I can remember is that mom was there. Mom was in the Sunday school class, and mom was doing this, and mom was doing that, and she was very, very
I think it's a
engaged
great
mother.
model. Look, I took my 3 kids, as you know, and went off to graduate school, and you look back on it now and you think, well, isn't that a little weird? At a time where there were very few women, none with 3 kids, we had a great time. I mean, it was just a great time. I think they would say that, and I think those things set patterns for years to come. Or maybe I ruined their lives and they haven't told me, so I'm not so sure, right? Well, it's interesting when you talk about this almost idyllic childhood, because I mean, I grew up in a farming community, and my favorite people were the ladies that cooked at the school, because they were just so nice. They were farm women, and they would come in and cook at the school. I loved my bus driver, and when I think about that, that was probably a very protected environment also. I mean, when I was a junior in high school, 4 schools consolidated to make 1 school, but what we did every Friday night, and it's a similar kind of thing, is every Friday night, I don't think we had big visionaries. I'm telling you right now, I don't remember the visionaries. But every Friday night after the ball games, the whole town would come for a square dance. So I spent my life, people didn't really date so much, as boys and girls went to the dances, but then the whole town came. Grandma and Grandpa came, Mom and Dad came, and everybody danced. And it was just such an enriching environment for me anyway. Maybe somebody else wouldn't have liked it, but I found it very enriching. But again, you know, that nurturance is really what it was. And I think that's a big part of leadership, nurturance, that not only does the leader have to go out and figure out how to get the nurturance she needs, but also to understand that leadership is about nurturing.
And I think, you know, I oftentimes look at a lot of different families and say, well, how did this person get there? And in our conversation about, you know, your pathway to being really a phenomenal leader.
Well, I don't know about that, but I have a good time.
You know, that there are some other very important similarities in terms of vision, because my parents were what I call active visionaries.
They wanted to change the world.
They wanted to change the world, and they talked about it all the time.
And they weren't even kids from the 60s.
Yeah, exactly, right. They were before that era.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think that there are folks, and I rather suspect in some of the discussions that we've had that, you know, visionaries don't necessarily have to be active visionaries, but they are folks who really create a sense that a child can go out and be.
There's
exactly.
That's exactly right.
They do that.
My mother was anti-education. My mother was angry if I did my homework because she wanted me to hang out with her, but she loved music, she was a professional singer, she loved dancing, she loved entertainment, and she saw a vision that way, which of course I resisted all my life till now. I have a radio TV show, speak all over the world, so hi Mom, it finally happened, you know. I mean, I guess, and that's probably why I did resist all of that, you know, because I wanted something a little bit deeper for me, you know, which, you know, I was able to do. But yes, I think you're right. I think that the smart kid picks up the feelings, and that's what you and I talked about. That I believe that families, they may hand down stories, they may hand down certain language and understandings, but they really hand down feelings.
Absolutely.
And so the feelings in your family were?
The same as the feelings in yours.
Exactly. And that's what, and we both grew up with, you can do something.
Right.
You are capable.
Right.
You can change the world. You can convert this feeling of confidence into whatever you want to convert it into, but the feeling of confidence came from parents who shared that joy. I agree with you. And I think that's a big thing that we have to think about in rearing kids in today's world, because what happened since I was young and since you were, you're still pretty young, but you know, since you were going to college, is that everything got so rule bound. You must do this so you do well in your SATs. You must take that class so that that looks good. You must be getting involved in this. And we took all of, I think that takes the, what do you call it? It takes the humanity out of a child's curiosity, and you try to market them like a product rather than not that we all don't want our kids to do well. Let's be clear. We want them to take these classes. We want to be on SATs. But if we go overboard, I think we can relax sometimes as parents and just say, give them a feeling of confidence and curiosity and see where the world takes them.
Yeah, and I think that is such an important statement you just made there, Teena, because what I find is that there is a struggle between, you know, how much do you guide a kid, how much do you not. But I think that for kids, and I think, you know, even though I had this wonderful childhood, probably the thing that had the most influence for me was literally seeing my dad have a heart attack at the age when I was 5. And it was really through that experience. And I think for kids, I mean, not to say that I wish anything as catastrophic as that. I mean, they could have had a very different outcome. And some of us survived that experience in my family very differently. But what I am saying, I do think that I agree with you that there is such great value in allowing children to succeed and fail.
Yes, I agree with you. And for us too.
And for us too.
Right.
Because, and I agree with you, I mean, I think about, you know, you say, well, how did you, you know, some of the ways in terms of kind of navigating from where I started from through some of the other areas of life, it wasn't all a bed of roses.
Right.
I wanted to go to a very competitive high school, and the first trial, I was told, no, we don't want you.
Right. And so what did you learn from that?
What I learned from that was that little emotional feeling that you talked about, that all is well with me. That even though they would turn me down, that's fine. That didn't take away from the fact that I still was a very good person.
And did you go back and make it work out?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And so when I applied it's the same thing. So when I applied to graduate school with a master's and pretty good grades, I actually got a letter from a graduate school saying, are you a serious student or just a mother who wants to get a doctorate? Right? And so I had two choices, which were, okay, I could crumble and think there's something wrong with me. I didn't think there was anything wrong with me. I thought there was something wrong with them, though. But I didn't want to go after them in a harsh way. So I called the dean and said, I really think you want me in your graduate program. And this is before we had, I suppose, law and these things. I don't know. But I wouldn't have gone. And I did go there. And he apologized to me down the road. And so there was that thing in your background and that thing in my background that helped us turn adversity into advantage.
Exactly.
That helped us bounce back
right.
from tough times and know that it wasn't about us and that we had the skills and strategies to get what we wanted to get.
Absolutely.
And that's what, so real quickly, how do you embed that in somebody? What's one thing you would think of that we would do with a kid or someone that you see at work to get that idea across?
I think, you know, one of the things, I mean, with being the mother of a 15-year-old boy, which is in and of itself, I'm always listening to suggestions because it's not an easy road. But what I've learned in terms of from parenting and watching my son grow is really to allow many natural consequences.
Yes.
Beginning from the very early age.
Sure. So what you're saying is to understand that we all make mistakes.
Yeah.
Learned optimism is about making mistakes,
Right.
learning and growing from all those kinds of things.
Absolutely.
And I would agree with you, and I would sort of want to end it today and have you come back. Will you come back?
Absolutely.
Okay, because let's talk
It's
about
great
this
fun.
more. Let's talk about bringing leadership into the home and into the schools, and and where it is. But I mean, let's just talk about sort of the organic infrastructure of it, because that's what I think that we're really talking about. And one of the ways I think that we develop leadership in kids is we show them the great joy of living. And we take risks. There's some suggestion that for longevity, one of the things associated with longevity is taking a few risks, maybe calculated risk. I'm not going to go out and play football, but that we live our lives like your mother did.
Right.
And in a way that my mother did, in a more limited way of saying, go for it, kiddos. Just go. Well, you're so great. Dr. Jan Keyes, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks very
I want to
much.
thank each of you for being with us here at Wisdom and Beyond. Come back next time. Jan's going to come back and we're going to have more fun. Go take care of yourselves and have fun. Bye-bye.